Welcome to a brand new podcast, The AI Leader. I'm Kris McFadyen and delighted to be joined by our resident data science co-host, Andy McMahon. Good to see you, Andy.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be back in this new form. We've emerged from the chrysalis as a butterfly. It's going to be good.
And we've now got a brand new co-host, Ishbel Softley. Ishbel, nice to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for welcoming me on to the team. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. And our first guest of the podcast is Arfon Smith, responsible AI lead for GitHub's Copilot. Arfon, great to have you on. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
No, spot on. Guys, look, it's obviously filmed or recorded anything for a while, so nice to catch up with you all. And we'll get some news. Andy, you've just announced that you're getting your role in the horizon.
I am. I've just left NatWest after 3 years, 4 months. Been a brilliant journey, but I'm looking forward to my next challenge, which I will announce in a sort of classic LinkedIn fashion in a couple of weeks. So everyone's on tenterhooks, I'm sure.
Well, exciting to see where you'll be going. And Ishbel, you're at Greco at the moment. You've been busy.
Yeah, so busy at Greco. Been there for 4 years, lead data scientist there. Lots of focus on kind of emissions work and things now. So just really interesting. So yeah, I'll be sticking around at Greco.
That's spot on. Arfon, we thought we would let you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit about your background, particularly interested in how you became an AI leader, your journey to where you're at the moment. So if you want to kind of introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure thing. Yeah, my name's Arfon Smith. I am based in Edinburgh in Scotland, and I've been working in sort of technical fields for close to 20 years now. I actually have a PhD in astronomy, which is where I got interested in software and data initially. Sort of one-liner for my PhD is the software was more interesting than the science I was doing, so I took that as a good sign. I should probably not pursue a career in academia, instead maybe focus on software. Actually, it was very early in the crowdsourcing science space, so I co-founded a project called Zooniverse, which before it, there was a project called Galaxy Zoo. So this was started at the University of Oxford, basically asking people to help solve science problems using human cognition to solve, things that were in 2008 wickedly hard problems. Probably many of those can now be solved with AI. And in fact, these projects have evolved to do that. But yeah, very early in the sort of crowdsourcing science area, that actually took me to GitHub. So I actually worked at GitHub in 2013 to 2016 and left to found a new unit at a NASA center in Baltimore, a place called Space Telescope Science Institute, which is the home of the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope and a load of other NASA missions. They have very rich data archives. And I started a new unit there to try and bring sort of modern data science and open source software to a very large data-rich astronomical archive. One of the wonderful things about astronomical data is that the data is sort of free to use because it has always has no commercial value. So there's very liberal policies around sharing. It's highly valuable but completely worthless at the same time from a business standpoint. So this makes for a very exciting place to work. And then I actually returned to GitHub back in 2020. That brought me back to Europe and to Scotland. And at that point, for a couple of years, I was leading all of the data engineering teams from a product standpoint. So what the sort of tools we should be building for our internal teams, internal customers of data. So that might be data science teams, but also things like business analytics, more traditional workloads. That got me started working with the Copilot team who this is 2021, 22, when it was very early in the story of Copilot. In fact, those products didn't exist yet, but these large language models were being built at that time. And I started working full-time on Copilot from a product standpoint about a year ago. And yeah, I've been working on our Copilot Enterprise SKU. So this sort of the top tier product that GitHub offers for about a year now. So I think I'll stop there. But for about the last 4 years, mostly in product, although honestly, I sort of consider myself a sort of a technical product, more technical of product managers, which I think is a good fit for a company like GitHub that sort of blurs the sort of lines of engineering and product quite routinely.
Perfect. A lot of our episode is going to be focused on Copilot being a sort of LLM-based product itself, and very topical for our show. But for those people out there who've not used Copilot, do you want to give us an overview of what that is as a product and how it's used and how it works?
Yeah, so I probably should say, when I say Copilot, I mean GitHub's Copilot. One of the things, so I think most people know this, but GitHub's owned by Microsoft these days, and they thought that name was so good, they're using it everywhere. So Microsoft's Copilot is not the first Copilot. Ours is the first. We feel quite proud of that, and we think the name is great in it, but they think it's great too, and have reused it. So I think there's like Office 365 Copilot now. Some people at GitHub are quite cranky about this. I think it's okay. I think it's fine. So it's, very quickly, it's the most widely adopted AI developer tool that there is today. There's about 1.3 million users today and about 50,000 companies making use of this tool. It is a product that first existed in the IDE, so where people write their code, and initially shipped as a product that helped do more complex code completions than something like an IntelliSense experience might have looked like in Visual Studio. So essentially, it sort of predicts the code you're going to write as you're authoring it. That was the initial product. So this code completion product. And if you've not used it, it's sort of, we call it ghost text. So as you're typing, it's sort of, you see in light gray or whatever color you pick, actually, the next line or few lines, typically under 10 lines of code are predicted. And then it's very quick to either dismiss or accept that. So if you tab, you accept it. If you keep typing, it just disappears. And then the next prediction comes along again. So initially it was a sort of code prediction experience. More recently, a lot of our work has been going into a conversational experience around code. So imagine like a ChatGPT session that knows everything about your code base, or a ChatGPT session. I use ChatGPT as an example because lots of people have used it, but that embedded right into github.com, and it understands your code, your organization, the people around the work. So we think that natural language is a really powerful bridge to software. We humans mostly communicate in natural language. And so more and more we're leaning into this sort of code understanding scenarios where you can use the AI to help you understand, explore a code base, make changes, or understand the code before you make changes. So really, I think one of the most important things to us is this name Copilot really is important, and is sort of founding sort of product principle for us, that this is your pilot sit in the left seat, right? So it's your right seat companion to you, the software engineer.
Amazing. It's amazing, Arfon, that there's 1.3 million, is that what you said? 1.3 million developers using it?
Yeah, paying, yeah, and more. There are lots of students using Copilot as well who don't pay, so I think it's probably closer to 2 million if you include.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's such a cool tool. Like I'm one of those users, and I wrote a bit about it in my book, actually, sort of talking about how we should use it as we kind of move towards this AI supported development. And I think the whole way you've sold the product, the ghostwriting piece, the very easy way to accept, and then bringing in the chat features is really powerful, like you say. So it's quite a sophisticated tool now. It obviously has gone on a journey, and you're not the only player in the space. You're not the only one working with LLMs. But can you talk a bit about, what have been the big innovations that have got it to the place that it's at? What's kind of, as you've gone through that road, what have been the big bits where you've thought, oh, we've done something really cool here? Yeah,
it's a good question. I mean, I think the large language models are obviously truly important, and so that's sort of, I don't think we probably want to get too deep into like the transformer architecture and how these all work, but this idea that they could, that there was value there, I think started to be realized by GitHub teams in probably as early as sort of mid 2020. We had access to GPT-3, I think in June 2020, I think OpenAI released GPT-3. I think it was available. Yeah. Lots of people were trying to understand what this model was capable of. And there'd long been this idea, we had this research team that still exists at GitHub called GitHub Next, that are meant to be on sort of Horizon 2 and 3 projects rather than the sort of, so they're not focused on today's problem or maybe even next year's, but the one after that is that little bit further out. And they had been exploring code generation and this idea that maybe these models could generate code. And they were just kind of kicking the tires. This is a research team. They were just doing exploratory research, and they were handcrafting tests for the model. And initially, and they were getting sort of new versions of the model fairly regularly. And this is through partnership with Microsoft and OpenAI. That was a pretty productive partnership. So we were getting access via Microsoft to these models, and very quickly they found that upwards of 90% of the problems they were giving to the model, it was doing a remarkably good job of solving. Initially only in Python, so the model was built just for Python code. Then OpenAI released a model that was a multi-language, so it had some JavaScript awareness and capabilities. And in about I think it was mid to late 2021, based on some feedback from us and working with Microsoft, and I'm sure other partners, I actually don't know who OpenAI was working with, in truth. OpenAI released the Codex model. So this was a fine-tuned model that was capable of generating source code, and that was kind of the idea that it was that would be good at that. So I would say the initial sort of GPT-3 release really showed us that there was this huge promise. Codex became a very important model, general purpose model for code generation. And then a lot of work on the extensions. And I think this is one of the things that people miss about Copilot, and I think it's actually incredibly important. Very briefly, when you're typing, there is a moment where you'll probably pause to think. And in that moment, the model is, a request goes from your editor, and this is, grabs context from the editor, what's maybe the lines above and below that you're writing, sends it to this model, and it generates a response, and then returns it to you and presents it in the editor. The time that we wait between you pausing and deciding whether to do that has been experimented on like crazy. So it feels natural. It shouldn't. You don't want to wait. You don't want to sort of sit there and go, come on, Copilot, do your thing. But you also don't want it to generate as you're mid-typing. So the timing is something that was experimented on a lot. I truly think that the cost of the one thing that we really did a lot of work on as well was working out how to dismiss suggestions. One of the kind of important things about AI experiences, I think, is working out what the cost of being wrong is for the user. And so, Codex often generates the thing that developers don't want to complete and include in their code. Initially, 7 out of 10 suggestions were not accepted. And yet it was so low cost to ignore the suggestion, just keep typing, that was still a great product. And 70% of the time it was wrong. That seems awful, but actually it's fast enough and iterative enough that still was a great product to use. And today it's towards 50% or more developers accept it. But so a lot of work in the extension and making the sort of the UX feel natural. And it's I would say the extension, the models, then of course all the services that host those models. There's sort of a lot of innovation along multiple aspects. But I'll stop there.
No, they're really good, and it is a smooth experience. It's quite amazing because you do sort of feel that it slots in at a natural point. Interestingly, just before we move on, I've found that I'll often accept a suggestion and then edit the suggestion. Right. So there's an interesting sort of dynamic there where technically right, but it's not right enough. So
and that's actually something our research teams are super interested in.
It's fascinating.
Sorry, but even like I've not had a chance to use it, but even having something, even having something to use, like you're saying, if it's there to edit, you've kind of got, probably 60% way through what you're going to do, so you don't need to kind of think from scratch. One of the things I was going to ask, if that's all right, is like, is it better at some coding languages than others? Because I kind of, sometimes I'm like, what am I writing in now? But I just wonder, is it better at predicting some things than other things?
Yeah, definitely. So we do track the primary measurement that we track for Copilot is a thing called acceptance rate. So when it makes that suggestion, what do you take the suggestion? Do you accept it? And so that can be anything between about 40 to 60%, depending on the language. And so it's actually, I think, best with Java, which intuitively doesn't surprise me because there's a lot of Java and it's quite verbose compared to other languages. Whereas I would guess, I don't know this, but I would guess it would be worse at something like Haskell or something relatively niche and maybe more compact. So, you know, the quality of the model is in a large part based on the availability of data to train on. So that's definitely something that influences it. I would guess also, you know, the sort of how fast the language is evolving as well. So, you know, again, Java doesn't move super fast. So it doesn't surprise me that Java's amongst the highest acceptance rate.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then the back to what you were saying as well, Andy, about the editing and, you know, taking some of the code and then editing it. This is something we do track as well, I think, in certainly in experiments that we do with the product, because one of the things we want to know really is it generating the absolute source code that goes into the project, or is how much editing work do people have to do? And in some cases, you know, there is some that is done.
Semi-acceptance.
Yes, right.
And does it retrain, like, so it's looking at its code base to autocomplete? Is that always adding to that code base that it's training on? So, like, obviously it's looking into what's available for it to predict its code in the first place. How often is that kind of like rebased or getting supplemented?
The models, so Copilot today uses OpenAI models exclusively, I think. I think that's correct in saying. So we're using you know, variants of GPT 3.5 for code completion, and for the natural language understanding, we're using GPT-4 variants there, typically. So the latest version of the model, I would assume, I actually don't know a huge amount about all of the training that OpenAI does. That's not work I'm involved in, but yeah, I would anticipate that is based on, you know, updated public code.
So ChatGPT then, does that offer something similar in terms of the code generation part? As an engineer, you can go on and you can ask, would that do a sort of predictive coding element for you? And then how much of a different offering would that be to your core Copilot product?
Yeah, it's definitely similar. ChatGPT is, I think, more of a general purpose tool. So a lot of the work that we do with Copilot is, you know, we're using similar models in many cases, but we're doing, you know, the tool is for GitHub is tailored to developer scenarios. So we are, for example, including, and this is actually one of the things we think would, you know, differentiates GitHub's Copilot today and in the long run. We're doing a lot of work in how the model is prompted based on the context that you're in. So maybe you're in a code editor, so you know, that's not the case with ChatGPT. You're usually on the web or maybe on your phone, which is where I use it a lot. Or if you're on github.com and using Copilot chat in there, then there's a lot of information available, what I would call the GitHub graph. So me, my relationship maybe to you or my team, your contributions, the history of the code in Git, recent pull requests, all that sort of, some of my colleagues call it like the GitHub grid. I think of it more of as graph of relationships between different entities. And so there's a lot of what makes these general purpose models valuable is the context that you give to them, that you retrieve and then supply to the model. And that's where GitHub has a lot of context available about the code, the people writing the code, and so we think gives a better experience in the long run for software development. I mean, you know, I use ChatGPT for lots of things. I just use Copilot, GitHub's Copilot for software work typically.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Arfon, because I think I've basically done this experiment, and I've got a hypothesis I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on, but there's lots of my kind of developer friends or people in my network, right? A lot of them really love using GPT-4, so ChatGPT Pro. and they'll use it. But I kind of prefer a Copilot in my IDE if I'm doing a coding problem. And I think there's something about the actual user journey you go on, because I think when you are in a chat interface, you don't like start typing the code and wait for autocomplete. What you do is you specify the problem in text, and you sort of say, write me a class that does this, or you say, write me a script that does this. And it's quite interesting because when I've done that, I've often felt, oh, there's a lot of work here to edit this. Whereas I feel like there's something about being in the IDE, and there's a personal preference. People will argue the other way, but there's something to me about, you know, the actual prompt being your code and your comments and all of the surrounding context as you mentioned. It just seems like you're a more in control Copilot, if you like, because you're constantly nudging it in the direction you want, which I personally like. I feel like ChatGPT, you ask to solve a problem, you get a big blob. You sort of have to fix it. Some people love that, some people don't. But I'm just kind of, what do you think about that? Is there anything in that?
Well, I think we're placing our bets on both sort of modalities, actually. So the current Copilot plugin in the editor supports both. So you have still the code completion experience, which is, I call it Copilot Classic. I don't think that's GitHub branding approved.
Classic already?
Yeah, well, a bit like Coke Classic, the original, you know. Okay. And then, anyway, not approved, but probably suitable for broadcast anyway. Not GitHub marketing approved.
You heard it here first, everyone. An AI Leader exclusive.
Yeah, so the classic experience is the IDE code completion one. There's lots of work to do we can do to make that better, but it is, you know, it's the thing that was first and I think still is a lot of value. We also think there's other things that are valuable in that chat session. So if you are trying to ask the AI a question, you're trying to understand something rather than I want to write this code. I actually have a question about the code base, or I want maybe to select some code and say, or select a test for a block of code and say, are there problems with this? Like, what problems might there be? So it's really a thing where having something explained to you is what you want. That we think is also really valuable. So the editor experience today is a chat panel and the code completion, and then the product I've been mostly working on in github.com is integrating AI into all other areas of software development lifecycle. So code review, maybe exploring code on .com, maybe trying to fix a build or something like that. So I think it depends what task you're trying to do. I agree with you though that write me code to do XX, you know, YY, whatever. You know, that's a lot of work when you can just be in the editor writing. I will say though I think the real breakthrough moment that I had with Copilot, where I really sort of started to think, okay, this is a big deal, is in that conversational experience. So I was riding a train home from King's Cross up to Edinburgh, so we all know that's about 4 hours roughly. And I was on train Wi-Fi, so not very good. And I was trying to solve a problem in a programming language I don't know very well, but I understood the problem. Like I conceptually knew what problem I wanted to solve, so I could describe it to the AI, but I couldn't even really have got into the code authoring step. And about 45 minutes into that train ride, I had the first version of the code working. And I was like, okay, this is a big deal, because I knew that I could specify the problem. I didn't know what libraries, what languages I was going to work in. And I basically let Copilot lead me through that. And every time I hit an error, I just gave it the stack trace. This didn't run. What do I do now? And, you know, sometimes I was like, oh, I can interpret that error myself. Just did a remarkably good job. So that was I basically, that's a defense of chat. I think a conversational experience can be very, very useful, but I agree that it can also be onerous and a bit verbose too, depending on what you're trying to do.
How does the tech then evolve from here, Arfon? So for instance, obviously Copilot being used in conjunction with an engineer. Where do you see this moving forward?
It's a good question. I mean, bluntly, I don't think we can predict the future. I think it's pretty hard to do a reliable job of that. I think there's a lot of opportunity to broaden the available context to the AI. So right now, Copilot in the editor is very limited in what context it has available to it. So, you know, if you are a large enterprise and you have particular API standards like coding standards, or you have strong sort of preferences about how software is created. Often these tools don't do a very good job with those today. You know, there are some techniques that you can use to improve that. Maybe you can fine tune a model, but that's quite a lot of work. Or you can do a better job retrieving relevant context for the model. But I think we're still very early on that. How good can the current sort of experiences that developers are already getting value for? I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve those still. I think and that includes this chat experience. So asking that natural language questions, the quality of those responses are fundamentally limited by a few things, you know, obviously the model quality, the context window. People get really obsessed with, like, you know, how many tokens can you feed this model? And I think Gemini is up to like 1 million or something, and 5 million for
1.5 million. 1.5
yeah,
million.
yeah, exactly. So, you know, all the context, but of course, it's like if you send it 1.5 million tokens, it takes forever. It's slow, and it's also really expensive. So like no business is going to build a product on that yet, because those requests are like $5 each or something. There's a lot of GPU under the hood there. But there's a lot that can be done to improve the efficiency of that context. And yeah, we're just so early still, I think, on a lot of these. More generally, though, the most immediate thing I think we will see, I think there's a lot of opportunity in doing more to connect natural language, like specification of problems. Just as I was saying, like, I understand a problem, I know what good looks like, I know what the outcome I want is, and have the AI start to do a first attempt at breaking down that problem and giving you candidate solutions. So I think there's been some work already, you know, on YouTube, Twitter, last few months about that. Lots of tools trying to bridge this sort of specification gap to implementation. I think that's something we shared a demo at our product conference, GitHub Universe, last year as well, called GitHub Workspace, which is similar to that. You start with a GitHub issue, you start with almost like a description of a defect, and then ask the AI to have a go at breaking down that problem into number of steps through, and then have human review of those, and then get to the point where you start to write code. So I think the next obvious step for me is that you know, helping sort of decompose work into more logical units, and then tackle those. I'll stop there. I mean, we could speculate further, but that's the thing most immediately on my horizon.
I think we're about to.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say, so we've all seen the Devon demo and then the kind of associated debunking of that. Is that where this kind of thing is going?
Well,
where our prompts were minimized,
Say again, what? Sorry.
Where our interaction's going to reduce significantly, and it'll be leading us where we should be going.
I don't know. I mean, I don't like. I mean, I said right at the top of the conversation, I think Copilot is important to GitHub. I think this idea that it's helping you solve your problem faster through your sort of, I think having the user as the problem owner is really important. Mm-hmm. So I do, you know, I think, so the workspace demo that we shared, I think is a really good example of how we would approach that problem, where you start with you specify the defect, you say what you want to accomplish. And then the AI says, well, in order to solve that, then I would recommend these 4 steps. And this idea that there's sort of an editable plan created by you and managed by you. If you then get to the point where it's something like, then I need to change the margin of this page from 10 pixels to 20 pixels. Well, sure, I don't think that's particularly impactful. It's important, but it's not particularly impactful human contribution. Instead, you know, we're sort of delegating some of those pieces to the AI. I don't know. I mean, I think the Devon stuff is, you know, I think we're going to see a ton more demos like that. I don't think I know what was fluff and what was real there. I think I'm sure they've got something interesting. Lots of people have been getting some interesting demos going. One of the challenges at GitHub is making it real, because we have lots of users, and so we often sort of we pay attention to what people are doing, but we also feel like part of our job is to stay the course on how we think these AIs should be developed.
Just yourself, Andy, maybe yourself, Ishbel, so just Andy, because you mentioned you use both Copilot and you use GPT-4. How much of that has evolved then? Like, when you're looking at your job day to day, are you thinking, oh, these tools are essential now for you to do your job, whereas that might not have been the case a couple of years ago? And do you see that only becoming more part and parcel? Obviously, your role's becoming a bit more leadership focused, but if you're a data scientist and still hands-on.
I think
Sorry.
I was
just going to say, I think it really just helps you kind of keep up to speed with things, because, you know, time is precious. Like, diaries are full, especially, you know, if you've got kind of a leadership role. So you've got to do all the kind of conversations and stakeholder stuff, do the planning, and then actually you're like, oh, I want to do some tech stuff as well. So I think it just keeps you up to date, or just, you know, makes you just be able to hit the ground running. And like, you know, do things in record speed that you wouldn't have been able to do before. Especially like if you're like me and you kind of move around companies and it's different programming language. I'm like, well, what am I writing in today? You know, so it can kind of help you like convert from one kind of, if you're an expert in one kind of language, you can obviously then pick up other things. Like, you know, I find myself writing in DAX sometimes in Power BI, and like, this is not my area, but you know, it can be really, really beneficial. So yeah, from that perspective, I'm definitely a fan and use it on a day-to-day basis.
I'd agree with that. I think the role I'm going to code a lot more, so I'll see, we'll kind of report back in a year if I'm like absolutely addicted. But in my kind of own projects, right, to Ishbel's point, I found it helps me go faster. I am not like all in on it as much as other people. Other people are like, oh, it's made me 10x more productive and stuff. I'm a bit more skeptical. I think it's definitely improved things. What it does though is it really helps me when I feel I've got a little bit of a block. So, you know, if I like last night I was trying to write some unit tests, for example, and something I was playing with Arfon to your example earlier, and you know, it just sort of helped start making suggestions, and it would sort of unblock me. So that's a good productivity gain as well. I've got the kind of feeling that as things evolve, back to that question about, you know, Devon, etc. There's a great person to follow on LinkedIn. Don't know if everyone follows him. Ethan Mollick, who's a professor at Wharton Business School. Talk about him all the time, right? But he's not a coder. He's an economist, and he has got early access to Devon. And although Devon's been debunked in general, he's building lots of stuff with it, and he's not a coder. To your point, Arfon, he's describing the problem. He's saying, build me a website that does X, build me a website that does Y. What I'm super interested in is what happens when that technology does mature. And I think we'll still be co-pilots. It's just things will abstract to a higher level, and we'll be building, like, to your point, Ishbel, way more sophisticated systems. And it'll be like, you know, managing all those pieces and gluing them together. We'll be more in that rather than, you know, build all the boilerplate. And that's kind of my optimistic view. Mm-hmm. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I kind of imagine even if you had a swarm of Devons around you, you'd be coordinating them, and sort of you'd probably be working in some meta language that orchestrates them. You know, it's kind of things will get more and more abstracted, but we'll still be. At least I hope so. I'm maybe just naively convincing myself. But yeah,
the level of trust you've got in it, obviously, like, so if you're an experienced coder, then you're like, oh, come on, that is the most convoluted way you could do that. Like, and then I'd be like, well, can you give me a more efficient code? And it's like, okay, here you go. And I'm like, well, why did you not give me that in the first place? It's like, I think, like, if we've got younger data scientists coming in, will they know that what they're looking at is bad code and then just use it? So then you're like adding in all this bad code into that base. This is like, so I think, like, there's I don't know what if that's part of, like, in the development process, it's like, are they auto correcting or auto, you know, prompting efficient code, or the most efficient way to do things as well? Like, is that part of the consideration? I guess that's one for you, Arfon, but for me, I'm like, let's just do it as succinctly as possible.
It's a good question. I think the only prediction I would make today is that there's going to be more code. And that's
agreed.
And what I mean by that is from both what we would traditionally call software engineers, software developers, data scientists today, people will write more code. Those people are already in those roles. I also think that it is, to your point about this person working with Devon, there will be more people writing code as well. So I don't know what the sort of global numbers for software developers are today. I'm guessing it's in the sort of hundreds of millions. I would expect it to be into the billions. You know, what are we at? 9 billion humans on the planet. I think, you know, the chance that more people can say, I have a problem I want to solve, and I'm now going to use this tool that's going to help me. I think that's inevitable, that barrier will be lowered. I think there's things like, I tried to write an iOS app about 10 years ago. I remember just finding it really frustrating. I gave up. Like, I don't know anything about like native development. And I remember it was when there was this Ruby to Objective-C bridge. Somebody had built these Ruby. I've written a lot of Ruby in my career. And so I remember thinking, oh, maybe that'll make it easier or something. Because I just, you know, and I just remember I got something running, but it was just so hard. And I was just trying to make a sort of hobbyist single user app. I wanted to make an app just for me.
Yeah.
And in a few evenings, I hacked on it and I gave up. I started to think I should have another go at it because I'm pretty sure it would work now.
Yeah.
Because what I can start with is a description of the problem I want to solve. And that's incredibly powerful. There's no shortage of people with problems and a deep understanding of their own problems. And this is one of the things I'm preparing for this conversation today. I was reflecting on this. The thing that I don't think we're going to lose with AI is the humans will still be the owners of their problem statements. You know, if you're a product manager, you're like, you know, whose problem are we trying to solve? Like, do we have a customer value statement here? You know, we all live in the real world. I know there's Boston Robotics and all those robots with, you know, the dogs and running around. So those things are probably going to face their own problems. But for us, we still are the owners of our own problems. We still understand them better than others. And so I hope not naively optimistic, but I am optimistic that the opportunity here is that the AI can help people actually make meaningful progress on those problems. And many of those will be through technology. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see.
No, I really like Arfon. I think complementary to that, I'm also a big believer that deep expertise will still be a positive thing. There's a lot of people thinking, you know, because you can make code without knowing much. But to your point, Ishbel, is it the best code, etc. But even if it was really good, I think it's still incumbent on us to train the next generation of people who understand that code, because they need to translate between that and people who own the problem statements, to your point, Arfon. So that's a good one. Maybe building on that a little bit, you know, if these things keep developing and developing, and Ishbel, you touched on this a little bit, if we have a kind of the next generation of junior software engineers and data scientists, etc., who are using more and more powerful co-pilots, is there a danger we kind of erode their ability to develop, you know, go through that apprenticeship where you have to do the hard yards and kind of, you know, you struggle and you sweat, but then you really, really learn and gain an appreciation? Are we kind of, and I'm not just saying, you know, they'll all become lazy button pushers, but what I mean is just, you know, it might even be the case that some junior roles disappear because, you know, they can be taken care of bots, etc. Do you have any thoughts on that kind of potential apprenticeship gap, which I've heard talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the future of work is a big topic, and I don't have I don't have huge amount to say other than I am somewhat sympathetic to this idea that we probably had versions of this discussion in the past. You know, you introduce technology and it is disruptive. But I'm also sympathetic to this idea that, yeah, but this might be different because this is actually sort of general purpose AI that's going to be solving lots of problems. I think, I don't know. I don't want people to lose sight of this thing that you still need to understand the problem. You know, humans, I think, are going to want to keep talking to humans about problems. I do think the thing that makes us uniquely different from ChatGPT is that I'm real. ChatGPT isn't, and GitHub's Copilot is not a human. And so there's that. I think the value of human-to-human interaction will become only ever more important. I think the sort of what do junior developers learn? It's kind of hard for me to remember. It's been a while, but we do rely upon building this shared context as a team about where you're at, your understanding of the problem. Do you even the way I might phrase a question as a junior developer to a senior one tells them something about their understanding of the problem. And so I think the thing I'm worried about is developers not talking to each other. That's the biggest thing I'm worried about, actually, because I think teams of people are important still and will remain important. So I'm a bit worried about sort of just talking to an AI and where that goes. That said, I'm also incredibly optimistic about talking to an AI because, rubber ducking a problem where you're really, really green and really, really new, you can actually learn a lot from the AI, especially if it's good. So there's a lot of what the AI is good at is this sort of personalization of understanding. So I'm not trying to sound like not trying to paint a vision of some dystopian future, but education in AI, I think, is a really big, exciting and scary opportunity. And so this is where you want to fall back on sort of strong ethical stances and around how you want to deploy it. But the fact that there's that, what's the phrase, explain like I'm 5, ELI 5, explain like you're explaining it to your grandmother or something. I really like this idea of explain like I'm me, ELIM. Like, what do I know? Imagine I am new to this area, but I do know about these other things. Like tailor your explanation of this based on your understanding of me. These models are already quite good at that, and that sort of personalization of how they generate content is, I think, very exciting. So I don't know. I'm sort of, I think it's complex. It's complicated, which is a bit of a dodge of an answer, but it genuinely is. And I think part of the challenge here is to fall back on some fairly strong product principles for how you want to safely deploy the AI, rather than just blindly chasing it every opportunity that you might see. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question well, but maybe that gave you
absolutely.
And I think it's maybe a nice note to kind of positive end into the show, with a nice sort of positive outlook on where the future AI is going. So, Arfon, that's been great to have you on. It's been a really super interesting chat. Sorry, Ishbel, was there something you wanted to just quickly say?
No, I was just kind of going to carry on with the same chat. Like, it's just seemed like for kind of junior developers, it's like having, your senior buddy around all the time to answer any stupid question that you might have. Whereas, like, your team leader or your senior data scientist or whatever might not have that time. So that's kind of, a positive as well. But yeah, obviously you're going to kind of verify that with someone that might kind of be able to debunk some of the answers that it's coming out with. And obviously just keeping that in mind. But yeah.
Ishbel, when we worked together, you were answering all my questions. And I don't know if I got dumber. Maybe I did. I don't know.
No.
That's good.
Well, no, brilliant. Great to have you on, and I hope you enjoyed that, and look forward to catching up again soon. All right.
Yeah, that was lots of fun. Thanks for the opportunity.
Cheers.
Really nice to meet you, Arfon.